Practice test 11 just dropped. Let's go. We're starting with an easy one. We're just going to subtract 1 on both sides. And what are we going to get? 4x equals 32. We're done. We're moving on. The function k is defined by this. What is the value of k of x when x equals 2? Okay, I'll just replace this x with a 2. So now it's 2 cubed, which is 8, plus 110, which is 118. Let's keep going. What was the mean time in minutes for Robert to complete a task for this project? Well, they gave us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. We just got to add them up and divide by 5. Why break out Desmos when it's easy enough to do by hand? 7 plus 15 is 22. Then this is 18 plus 22 gets you to 40. But then we have to divide by the number of numbers that we just added up, which of course is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 40 divided by 5. You don't need Desmos for that one. Moving on to 4. Let's read the actual question. Good strategy. If there are 6 1996 select grade Lincoln pennies in the collection. Okay, so 1996 select grade Lincoln pennies is our Y. So when they say there are 6 of those, they're telling us that Y equals 6. Then what are they asking for? They said how many 2009 premium log cabin pennies. Okay, well 2009 blah 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 is X. So basically, what is X when Y equals 6? So okay, just plug in the 6. Not too difficult. Now, sometimes it's a good idea to go to Desmos even when you don't need it, just so you don't make a mistake in the calculation. So I'm just going to type in 8x plus 11 times 6 equals 170. And in case you didn't know, you can type in an equation and Desmos will often solve it for you. Very, very common that it will. So now that we got 13, 0, that just means that the answer is 13. All right, let's move on. We got the graph of this function is shown. Which of the following best describes this function? Well, this is definitely not a straight line, so we would not call it linear. It's exponential, and it's increasing as it goes to the right. Always as you go to the right. This problem is what's known as a complete waste of time. So we're going to move on to number 7. And number 7, I already did a little bit of what they said over here. They said that we got 2 triangles that are congruent, and they said B and E are right angles. Then they told us that A is 27 degrees. So I can put A over here, say it's 27 degrees. And remember, it's supposed to be ABC. So now I can finally fill out ABC, and the other one's DEF. So that means that D is going to have to be 27 as well, by the way. And they're asking for angle F. Well, okay, I just got to do 90 minus 27, which is 63. So that's your answer right there. This one, they are saying which equation gives the number of players eliminated at the end of round R. I am purposely reading the question first. Okay, now let's read what's going on. There are 240 players in a tennis competition that includes 4 rounds of matches. Each player in the competition will play a match against another player in round 1. At the end of each round, a lot of times you got to skip ahead until you get to the important information. At the end of each round, the player who loses the match is eliminated, and the player who won the match advances to the next round to play a match against another winning player. Okay, so they want to know how many players are going to be eliminated at the end of round R. But let's get started with just pretending that R is 1. So we're at the end of round 1. But if we start with 240 players, then we're going to have 120 players versus 120 players. But whoever loses the match is going to get eliminated. So that means we're going to have 120 winners, but we're also going to have 120 losers. Those kids are going to get eliminated. And that's what they're asking for. They're asking for the number of players that got eliminated. So they want to know how many losers we got. Now, if it was R equals 1, then that means the number of players that got eliminated is supposed to come out to 120. So if R equals 1 in the first one, is this going to come out to 120? I don't think so. 15 times 1/2, definitely not 120. 15 times 2, definitely not. 240 times 1/2, yes, that comes out to 120. 240 times, no, definitely not. So without having to do any other rounds or think about the general pattern, we were able to get the answer by just plugging in a simple number. Key SAT strategy, obviously. This one is not even worth reading what's going on here, because if you just read the answer choices, you can tell that they're just asking you to solve for R. Well, what does that mean? We need to get rid of the fraction bar, which means division. How do you get rid of division? You multiply. So that means we're just going to multiply by 38. And if we scan the answer choices, we can see that in answer choice C, they just multiplied the other side by 38. Now, another thing that they could have done is distribute it, but they left it like that. So we're going to leave it like that. This one wants you to find the equation for line J. They told you that line J is parallel to line K. What do we know is true when two lines are parallel? It means their slopes is equal. So if I have a slope of 6 over here, then I have to make sure that I have a slope of 6 for the, oh my God, that's the only one that has a slope of 6. Even up till problem 10, we are still dealing with the easy problem. So let's move on to number 11. They said the length of one side of square M is 6 times the length of one side of square N. The area of square N is 49 square feet. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just write down that this is supposed to be for N, and they're telling me that the area is 49, but what does that mean about the two sides? It means that each one has to be 7. So when they're talking about the length of one side of square N, well, we already know that that is 7. So when I reread this, they say the length of one side of square M, well, that is going to be 6 times 7. But what is 6 times 7? 6 times 7 is 42. So they're telling me that the length of one side of square M is 42, and then they want to know the area of square M. Well, clearly that's going to be a much bigger square where it's going to have 42 for each of its side lengths. Now, 42 times 42, well, that's kind of like 40 times 40, which is 1600. And clearly all of these are too small, so it must be A. When you're solving these and you're looking for just one real solution, you would start off by taking the square root. That'll cancel out the square. But then you would also always want to put your plus or minus. Now, when I'm doing this on the second answer choice, I'm not going to get one real solution. I'm going to get 0 because it's the square root of a negative number. And when I'm looking at C, am I going to get one real solution? Well, no, because of the plus or minus. That actually means that one time you would have the square root of 45, but one time you would have the negative of that. And that same problem is going to happen in D as well. Only when you have plus or minus 0 does that result in just one solution, because plus or minus 0 means the same thing as 0 and negative 0, and both of those are the same thing. So just one real solution whenever you have a 0 underneath a square root. If you like renting buses, you're going to love this problem. They are charging you $9.50 for the first 3 hours. So $9.50 for the first 3 hours, but then you're going to get charged an additional $50 per hour for each hour after the first 3 hours. So I can already tell you that that's going to be like 50 times the number of additional hours. So then they're telling us that the total cost is $11.50. So just by doing a little bit of basic setup, I can already tell that it's not going to be A or B. It's got to be $9.50. That's set in stone, plus 50 times a certain amount of additional hours. But if you think about how many additional hours there will be, if you're renting it for T hours, then there's going to be T minus 3. Think about an example. Imagine if T was equal to 4, then how many additional hours would there be? Well, it would only be 4 minus 3. It wouldn't actually be 4 additional hours. It would only be 1 additional hour. So you wouldn't want to leave it as $9.50 plus 50 times T. It's actually T minus 3 if T is supposed to be all the hours. So there we go. We are using C. If you just skip to the very end here, they're asking you what is the value of B, but they're also telling you that we're using mx plus b. Now, b is always the y-intercept, and the y-intercept always means that the x is 0. That's really the key to the problem. The key to the problem is that x must be 0. Now, if we look at our table, they didn't give us the value when x is 0, did they? But we can easily pick up on the pattern here, is that each time I move up, I just have to add 4. So this is kind of a problem for babies. Here they're saying that the population of the town of Smithville doubled every 75 years from 1659 to 1959. They were keeping some good records. The population of this town was 240 grand in 1959. What was the population in 1659? So we have at 1659, that is what they're asking about. But in 1959, they're telling us that it's 240 grand. But they're telling us that the population doubled every 75 years. But how many doublings would we have? Well, how many chunks of 75 are found between 1659 and 19? Well, that's an extra 300 years. So how many 75s fit inside of 300? Well, you could throw that in Desmos if you want, but the answer is 4. One way to calculate that by hand is just simply to realize 75 times 2 is 150. And then if I multiply that by 2, I would get to 300. So anyway, answer is 4. That's how many doublings I will have. So what that means is I should be doubling whatever it was in 1659, which means I'm multiplying by 2. But how many times am I going to do that? 4 times. What's that going to come out to? 240 grand. Now, what is 2 to the 4, by the way? It's actually just the same thing as 16. So all I have to do here is just do 240 grand divided by 16, and that'll get me the population in 1659. Now, if you want to run to Desmos, that's fine. If you want to be super cool, what you could do is divide 24 by 16. Each of those can be divided by 8. That'll get you 3. This will get you 2. So now I end up getting 30,000 divided by 2, which is 15,000. So 15,000, that's what the population used to be. You can multiply it by 16 and you'll find out it does come out to 240. Here they're asking us for the slope of the line of best fit. So I just need to be staring at the line of best fit, which is the actual line. Don't use the points, use the actual line. But then they want the slope of that line. So what I'll do is I'll just estimate it because they said it's closest to. And I'm noticing over here I've got a point that's kind of like 10, 9. And over here, this is kind of like 0, 3. So then all I got to do is 9 minus 3 over 10 minus 0. That's 6 over 10, which is 0.6. And we're done. 17 wants you to match up the 3 points that they gave you with the correct equation. Now, the easiest way to do this one is by making sure that when you plug in any of your points, let's say 32, 8, you end up getting it to work on the equation. But if I look at C and D, I see that 32 is showing up in each of those. And if I were to plug in the 32 for X into this one, then 32 minus 32 would be 0. And then I would have something times 0, which is 0, plus 32. So that would come out to 32. But I don't want it to come out to 32. I want it to come out to 8. So that one's actually definitely not my answer based upon what we just said. So now if I go to the last one and I plug in 32 there, well, again, same logic. This is going to come out to 0 minus 32. But it's not supposed to come out to minus 32. It's supposed to come out to 8. So that one's also not correct. Now, if I try the same logic using this point right here, and I plug in 30 for X, then when I do that, this is all going to come out to 0 plus, but it's not supposed to come out to 4. It's supposed to come out to negative 8. So that one's not correct either. And then if you go here and you plug in the 30, what's it coming out to? Negative 8. That's exactly what I wanted it to come out to. So that means that B is the correct answer. For this one, you got to know the equation of a circle. And the equation of a circle is always x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where the h and the k are the x and y coordinates of the center. So what that means is that h should be 19, and looks like that's happening in A. And k should be 18. That's also happening in A. Now, not only is it happening in A, it's actually happening in all of them, right? Okay, so what? But now they're saying that the radius is 9k. So that means where I see r, I'm supposed to put 9k. But then it still has to be squared. Now, what does that mean? That means that I'm going to have 9 squared, but I'm also going to have k squared. What is 9 squared? It's 81. So that means that this is supposed to come out to 81k squared. Now this one's only coming out to 81k. Not cool. This is the only one that's doing 81k squared. Therefore, we're done. We got one for the Star Wars fans here. They're saying based on the graph, which of the following is closest to the estimated mass in kilograms of each N-type star in this cluster. Okay, so let's go back and read. It says a certain open star cluster contains M-type stars and K type stars. The K standing for kill type stars, kind of like the Death Star. The estimated total mass of M type and K type stars in this cluster is 127 whatevers. The graph shown models the possible number of combinations of X and Y. Well, I can see over here, yeah, sure, I could call it X and Y, but I could also call it M and K. But what they want to know is what's the estimated mass of each M type star. The key to this problem is realizing the coordinates over here are approximately 160, 0. Now, that is important because it means that you would have 160 M, but then 0 of the K. So that means in that case, that would be the particular combination where you're only dealing with M-type stars. So that would take up the total mass. So if the total mass is 127, we just want to divide that by 160 to figure out what each one is. And it's clearly not going to come out to either one of these, but if you type it in, you will get about 800. So yeah, we're going with A then. We're going to start by reading the actual question here. They want to know the length of QS. I'm just going to call that X. And I can see that they're talking about cosine and sine here. But not only that, they're always talking about angle Q. So what that means is I'm just going to circle angle Q. And I got to figure out how I should label the 18. Now, the 18, is that the opposite, the adjacent, or the hypotenuse? It is the opposite because I'm going right through the triangle. And the X, well, what's that? That is the hypotenuse. And according to the Native American that discovered America, Sokotoa, we want to be dealing with opposite and hypotenuse. We're going to be dealing with So we're going to have sine of Q equals opposite over hypotenuse. So it's going to be 18, our opposite, over the X, which is our hypotenuse. Then we can multiply both sides here by X. That'll cancel this out. And then we just have to divide both sides by sine of Q. And that'll get us to here. For this problem, we need a strategy. That strategy is to first focus on what they're actually asking for. They're asking for the value of A. Where do I see A? I see it right here inside of this equation. So the equation is often the most important thing that you're going to find inside of a word problem. Okay, so we've got this equation, but they're asking for the value of A. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's a little bit hard to understand exactly what's going on there. But before we dive into it, let's just stare at this equation real quick. It looks kind of like m times x minus x1. And then there's the plus 433. What's the equation that looks like m times x minus x1? It's y minus y1. So if I want to manipulate this equation that they gave me so it looks more like that one that I'm used to, I could do it by subtracting 433 from both sides. If I do that, the equation would now become f of x minus 433. And okay, the 433, maybe that's my y1 when my x1 is A. Okay, but where do I see the 433 show up in the problem? It says 433 BHP. And in fact, if you look at the beginning of the problem, it says F is measured in bhp. And it also says that there's another type of unit. And down here it says X is the engine speed in RPM. But that part where it says the 433, it says according to this function, the car's predicted power is 433 bhp at an engine speed of 3331 RPM. Huh. Okay, so it's kind of like they're just giving me a point there. And the point that they're giving me, it's got to be in the form x comma y, but the x in this case would be the 3331 and the y is 433. But remember what they were asking us for? They were asking us for a. But wait a second, that a is actually the same thing as x1. And what we just found is that our y1 is 433. So what does that mean? That means that the x is just the 3331. That's it. That's all you really need to do for this problem. Now, of course, they gave you a little bit of extra info here that we didn't end up using, but all we really needed to do was a clever use of the y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1 formula. All right, this one's extremely easy to do on Desmos, but if you want it to be even faster in Desmos, you should know that you're just going to set each of these pieces equal to 0. And this is not something you should actually be writing down, but you should just know that when you solve something that has an exponent of 3, you're going to want to solve using a cube root. But when you do a cube root, you do not do the plus or minus thing. That is not a thing for odd exponents. So when you do get an answer for that, you're just going to get one answer. But when we do the same kind of thing for the next one, well, are we only going to get one answer? Well, no, because when you take any even root, you do put the plus or minus. So for that, you're going to end up with 2 more answers. And 1 plus 2, you could do that on Desmos if you want. If you're one of those people that overuses Desmos, and obviously we didn't really have to use it that much for this module, but maybe in the next section. Go to boremasstutor.com to get your 800. All right, everybody, we are on to module 2. If you want to boost your SAT score to the max, that would be the website to do it. Hosey purchased a pass that cost $19.50 to tour nature preserve. She also purchased 10 identical stickers to give to her nieces and nephews. The pass and the stickers cost $62 total. What was the cost of one sticker? So if we got that everything is adding up to 62, well, she purchased that pass for $19.50, but then she also purchased 10 stickers. I'm going to call that 10S. And what do they want to know? They want to know the cost of one sticker, so that would just be S. So all I got to do here is subtract the $19.50, and then we'll divide by 10 to get rid of that 10. So we can estimate that actually. That would be 62 minus 20, which would be 42. Divided by 10 is 4.2. And this one is clearly close. We done. We got a great problem for all you babies out there. They're telling us that x plus y is equal to 125, but they showed us x plus y in the other equation. So that means I can replace that with a 125. So now I have 125 plus y equals 155, and clearly y is 30. We done. So we are doing an exciting adventure to a packing store to buy containers and tape. And we only got 15 bucks. So when they ask you which could represent the number of containers and rolls that we can buy, we definitely have to be less than or equal to 15. Because if we only got 15 bucks, well, we can't let the total amount of money that we're going to pay for it be more than 15. So these ones are gone. And what are we going to end up paying? Well, we're going to end up paying $1.87 for each container. So that means we got to do 1.87 times C. And obviously you guys want to click off of the problem right now because you already know what's going to happen here. So the answer is A. So here they're giving us a line of best fit. That would be the line that goes through the points, not necessarily that the points are on that line, but just creating a best fit. And they want the slope of that. But the slope is always equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And you can just estimate it here because they said closest. So this is kind of like 0, 2, and this one is kind of like 10, 5, I guess. But then you just do 5 minus 2 over 10 minus 0. That's 3 over 10. That's approximately 0.3, which would be closest to this one. Definitely not this one. There's no way we were off by that much. So the answer is C. Let's take a short break because I really have to. They're asking us which statement is the best interpretation of the point 149, 186, and they put us right there, and they said that the graph shows the estimated boiling point Y in degrees Celsius of a normal paraffin with a molecular weight of X grams per mole. So X in this case is the 149 grams per mole, and the Y is the 186 degrees Celsius. So I definitely want a problem that's talking about 186 degrees Celsius, and I can see that already eliminates A. But one of the other things I'm noticing is that this one's talking about the minimum and the maximum. Why? This doesn't look like it's the maximum or the minimum. So those ones are also gone, and that means the answer must be B. This one is asking you to do 7 times f of 2. So first thing you got to do is figure out f of 2. That's just 8. So that means you're actually doing 7 times 8 minus g of 2. Well, g of 2, if you plug in 2 into that, you're just going to get 12. And then that's 56 minus 12, which is going to end in a 4. All right, here they are telling us we got circle A. It's got this equation. And then they're talking about circle B. And they're saying it's got this equation. But they also told us that circle B has the same center. Okay, well, if you knew anything about the circle equations, you could have been able to figure that out from the equations. But the radius of circle B is 2 times the radius of circle A. But what is the radius of circle A? Well, this is equal to r squared, so that means that the radius of circle A is 5, the square root of 25. So now if the radius of circle B is 2 times that, that means that the radius of circle B is equal to 2 times 5, which is 10. So that means that 10 squared, which is the radius squared, must equal K. And what are they asking for? They're asking for K. So that means K is equal to 100. All right, here they're saying f of x is equal to this, and then for what value of x does f of x equal 63? So they want this to equal 63. So now we just got to solve that equation. You could start by dividing by 9. If you divide by 9, you get 7 equals 2x plus 3. I hope y'all know how to finish it up, and we done. Here they're telling us one solution to the given equation can be written as that. Okay, what that look like, fam? that to me look like negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, now does that do a vibe check with our equation? Well, let's see. This is b, so there you go. That's matching up. That looks pretty good. And what are they asking for? The value of k. So k is going to be equal to this part, the b squared minus 4ac, which in our case is equal to 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5, because our a is 1, our b is 7, and our c is 5. So that's all we got to do. We just got to calculate that. That's 49 minus 20, which I believe is 29. If y'all hyped up for a like terms problem, then you gonna go wild for this one. They trying to ask us what's the value of a, and they're saying that a is going to be the number in front of the x squared. You feel me? All right, but where is it going to be any x squared terms? Let's see. I got one right here. I got another one right there. And you might have noticed that I underlined the negative right there, because if you distribute that negative, it would be kind of like a negative 3x squared. Now, same deal for the negative over here that we're going to be distributing to the 5x squared. So that means we're going to get ourselves a negative 5x squared plus a negative 3x squared. And when we add thems together, what's we going to be feeling? We're going to be feeling negative 8. Yeah. Oh my God, a problem where we actually have to do a little bit of thinking. We can't just run to Desmos blindly. Let's see, the shaded region shown represents the solution to the inequality ry is less than 60. That's our focus. But when I'm looking at this equation over here, this graph, then right over here, this line would represent y equals 4. The problem is we're shading above it, and when you shade above it, it should actually be y is greater than whatever number. In this case, y is greater than 4. Okay, so ultimately we want this to be the same thing as y is greater than 4. Now, if I wanted to get it to look like that, I need to figure out which value of r I'm going to want to use. So if I just pop in 15 right there, then I would divide by 15 to get rid of it. But would that get me what I'm looking for? Y is greater than 4? No, it would get me y is less than 4. So instead, if I go run to the negative 15, and I had put negative 15 here instead, I'd be dividing by a negative. And when you divide by a negative, that's gonna flip your sign. And that's gonna give you the greater than that you was looking for. And that means that the answer is D, in fact. All right, they're telling us set K consists of all the positive integers that are less than or equal to 160. So 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 159 and 160. Where none of the integers are repeated. Okay. If a number is selected at random from set K, what is the probability of selecting a number that is even and less than or equal to 50? Well, let's focus on the less than or equal to 50 part of that first. How many of those numbers would be less than or equal to 50? Well, you would have 1 through 50, so that would be 50 numbers right there. But then, out of those numbers, how many of those are also even? Because it says it has to be even and less than or equal to 50. Well, let's see, 2, 4, 6, and so on up until 50. So just cutting out the 1 and the 3. In other words, you're going to end up with 1 out of every 2 of those. So 1/2 of 50, which means that you're actually going to only end up with 25 of those. But they're saying that the number is selected at random from set K, which was the 160 numbers. So that means we're dividing by 160. And now, cool little trick on Desmos, in case you guys are not aware of this, is you can just tell it 25 over 160, and then click on this, and it will get you your fraction that you're looking for, the reduced form, if you thought that was helpful. Don't forget, you get more help at this website. All right, here they're telling us that we got a histogram that summarizes data set A, which represents the number of points per player earned by 50 players of a game. Then it says that a new player earns 18 points. That would not be very good. That would be less than the number of points that every other player got. And when we account for that new player, that gets us a new data set that we're going to call set B that now has 51 values. And they're asking us which of the following must be true. Now, if I look at the mean first, if you throw in a value that is less than every other value in the data set, that is one of the ways to know that your mean is going to get dragged down. And that's exactly what this is saying. It's saying that the mean for data set B is less than the original mean. So yeah, that one's definitely true. We're keeping that one. Now, what about the median? Is the median also going to get dragged down? Well, here's the thing. We actually don't know what the median is right now. We can say it's going to be some number that's in between 50 and 60, but I can't tell you for sure that the median is going to be dragged down. Here's one example. One example is that maybe out of all of the 27 players that are in this bar that are between 50 and 60 points in the game, maybe they all got 51. Now, if they all got 51, what would happen if you end up throwing in that new data value? And of course, I'd have to list all the other ones. But if I want to end up getting the middle number once I do list them all, what could happen is that the median shifts down a little bit and it goes from here to here. That's a possibility. But wait a second, because these two numbers are the same, just shifting the place of the median is not going to change the value. However, we don't know that all of these are going to end up being the same. It could have been that maybe it's 51 and then 52 and then 53. And in that case, that would change the median. So when they're saying which of the following must be true, well, I'm not going to go with one because it could be true. It's not that it must be true. So the answer is 2 only. We got ourselves a proportion problem. So we're going to have to try to make two fractions that are equal to one another. Here it says that we got a scale, which has a length of 1 inch. And then it's got that is equivalent to 17/3 feet in the actual building. So I'm going to start by just writing that down as 1 inch over 17/3 feet. Then it says in the actual building, that measures X feet. So I have to put that on the bottom just like I did before for the other one that was actual. And then I have to put the scale one on the top. But the next thing it says is which represents the corresponding length in inches of the model. So model means the same thing as the scale in this case. So that means I'm going to have to put some sort of new letter. I don't know what I want to put, but how about I just put A? A is a nice letter that I haven't used yet. And now that's in inches, so I'll put A inches. So now I have my proportion set up, but what are they asking me for? Well, they were saying which expression represents the corresponding length in inches of the model. So that's that new letter that I just came up with. That's the A. So that's the thing I need to solve for. Now the units in this case are not going to end up mattering because it's inches over feet on this side and also inches over feet on that side. So really the only thing that matters is 1 over 17 over 3 equals a over x. But remember, we're solving for a, so that means I just need to multiply both sides by the x. That'll cancel out the x down there. And now I got to figure out what this comes out to. But no, when I have 1 over a fraction, that actually allows you to flip the fraction. So now you have x times 3 over 17, that equals a. So that's 3x over 17, which is c. All right, we got a nice easy one here. We want to start by taking this cube root and swapping it out for being the bottom of the fraction exponent. That's a very important rule to remember. You can remember that by remembering where you are going to find the roots of a tree. You're going to find them at the bottom of the tree. Okay, so now we're setting that equal to this, but they told me that t is equal to p to the 3n minus 1. So I'll just copy that in. Instead of the t, I'm now going to put that, but that still needs to be raised to the 9 over 7. So we're raising that to 9 over 7. And they're asking us what's the value of n. So at this point, I want to multiply the 9 over 7 in, and it's going to be 9 over 7 times 3n minus 1 equals 2/3. Because if you have the same base, you can just basically ignore it and just set these equal to each other. So then we just head to Desmos and get it to solve the equation, so that way we don't make any mistakes. We'll just put in 2/3 equals 9 over 7 times 3x minus 1. And then we'll just scroll over here and see what our answer is. And okay, so that is possible to round that to whatever fits in. So you can just fit in as many of those as necessary. You don't have to round it, actually. You can just cut it off when you run out of stuff. So the SAT will just let you just type it in until you can't. So just type in whatever you can. But yeah, it will just be 0.50617 as your answer. All right, we got to find a cool way to get this problem done. The first thing that we could do is write down the equation a couple times, because one time we can plug in this point and the other time we can plug in that point. You might be like, point? What you talking about, point? Well, this is actually the same thing as a point of -2, 0. But let's start by plugging in the 0, 22. So that means I'm going to put a 0 wherever there's an x. So that means I just ignore all of these. Those will just turn into 0. Negative over negative will cancel out, and you'll have a over b. And I still got to plug in the 22 for my y value, or my g of x in this case. So now I have 22 equals a over b. Okay, but now let's move on to plugging in the other point. Now for the other point, I need to plug in the 0 for the y, and I need to plug in -22 for all of those x's. But here's the thing. I can save myself a little bit of writing right now, because if you have a fraction equal to 0, the only thing that matters is that the top is going to equal 0. Sure, I could put the bottom, but the bottom doesn't matter, because when I multiply both sides by whatever the bottom is, if I do that on each side, what's going to happen is that I'll just get 0 on the left side, and I'll only be left with whatever the top is. And the top in this case, sure, it's this, but I got to plug in my -22. So it's -22 squared minus -22 minus a. So that's just the same thing as saying regular 22 squared plus 22 minus a. And that means that a is equal to 22 squared plus 22. Now remember, I'm actually after b, so I want to now plug this in for a over here. 22 squared plus 22 over b equals 22. Then I want to solve this. Now, I could just go to Desmos right now and have it solve it for me. I could be clever, but you guys like the Desmos stuff, so I'll just do that. 22 equals, set up my fraction bar, 22 squared plus 22 over b is not going to work. You have to put it over x if you want Desmos to solve it. And when you zoom out, you then zoom in, and you find out that 23 is the answer for B. Be good. I know another thing that starts with B, and it's this awesome website that will boost your SAT score to a level you've never thought imaginable. I've even had some students get an 810 with my help. They're telling us that we have two lines that intersect at exactly one point, forming two acute angles and two obtuse angles. So that means it's going to look something like this, where I end up with my two acute angles over here, and I have my two obtuse angles. Now, they're saying the measure of one of these angles is 9x minus 140, but they're not telling me which one is the 9x minus 140. So it could be that the 9x minus 140 goes over here, but it could be that it goes up over here for the acute one instead. I don't know where to place it. I'll just leave it there for now. And now it says, which of the following could not be the sum of the measures of any two of these angles? Well, let's imagine we did put it up there. If we do that, then down here, it would also have to be equal to 9x minus 140. So if I were to take the sum of those two, what would I get? I would get 18x minus 280. Now remember, we're after the one that is not possible, so that means we have to throw this out because that's the one that is possible. But we're looking for the one that's not possible. Okay, so that one's gone. Here's another thing that we need to consider. What if instead of adding up the top and the bottom, I ended up adding the top and the one on the left? If I were to add those two together, well, let's see. That would form a half circle, which would form 180, which means that that's also out of the game. Okay. But now let's also consider what could happen if I tried to figure out what this blue angle actually is. Well, remember how we just said that the blue one and the 9x minus 40, 9x minus 140, they have to add up plus 9x minus 140. What do they have to add up to? Well, we just said it. They have to add up to 180, right? So if I write that down, I can try to solve for what question mark is. And how would I do that? Well, I would take the 180 and subtract the 9x minus 140. Keep hitting the wrong button there, but I'm not going to re-record this. That's not going to happen. And then I'm going to distribute the minus. So that gets me minus 9x plus 140. And now I have 180 minus 9x plus 140. 180 plus 140, that is 320 minus 9x. So that's what the question mark angle would be. So if the question mark angle is 320 minus 9x, then that means this other one over here would also be 320 minus 9x. But what would happen if I were to add those together? If I add those together, I get 640 minus 18x. So remember, that's the one we have to rule out. So therefore, by process of elimination, the answer has to be A. And if you want to get an A on your test, don't forget to go to the website. Got a fun little problem here where we first need to put in all the information that they gave us. And then after we do that, we then got to realize what they're asking for. They're asking for YZ, so that means I'm going to put an X right there. But this angle and that angle both have A, so that means that those angles are equal. Then I could say that these two angles are equal. Well, that must mean that all the angles are equal. And if all the angles are equal, that means we can set up a proportion. So to set up a proportion here, we can say we definitely need to get X involved if we're going to try to solve for X. So I'm going to set up this one as X over 21 coming from the triangle on the right. But then I want to figure out what the corresponding sides are on this side. Now you can just kind of visually see it. It's relatively easy in this case that it's 60 over 70. You can say that both the X and the 60, they're both across from the same angle. So that's how you could have done it if you want to be very precise in case it's a harder diagram. But anyway, now we have our proportion set up. So if I want to solve for X, all I got to do is multiply by 21. That'll cancel out the divide by 21. So then I come over here. I also multiply by 21. And I'm going to be super cool about this. We're going to cancel out the two zeros and say that 21 divided by 7 is 3. 3 times 6 is 18. You know what else is super cool? Going to this website. All right, see you guys later. All right, the given equation is one equation in a system of two linear equations if the system of equations has at least one solution. Which of the following equations could be the other equation in the system? So if we're going to let this one be our first equation and then this is the other equation in the system, would that have at least one solution? Well, one way to do that is to check to see if they ever share a point. So if I turn on the first one, but then I turn on the second one, do they ever share a point? Oh, not only do they share a point, they share every point. So yeah, that could definitely be it. This is definitely one of the answer choices. Now, if I change that plus to a minus, do they share at least one solution? Well, yeah, the answer is they still do. Absolutely. Because they share at least one point. So that means that the answer is 1 and 2. What you gonna do? We got a killer problem over here. They're asking for the surface area of the right rectangular prism. Let's just put a picture of the right rectangular prism. And then they're telling us that the base area is 24t. So if I draw over here the 24t, that would equal the LW. That's what base means in this case, just the LW that's at the bottom. And then they're telling me that the length is 8 over 3. And they're also telling me that each is equal to 15. And now I want to write down the formula for the surface area. And that's actually just going to be LW plus LH plus WH times 2. Now, the reason why you have to multiply by 2 is because you're going to have LW on the top, but you're also going to have LW on the bottom. You're going to have WH on the side, but also WH on the other side. And same for the one that's staring us in the face right there, LH. You'd also have a LH in the back as well. So if you look at a tissue box, you always got the top, but you got the corresponding bottom. You got the side, but you got the other side. Every single one that you can see over here, all the different possible combinations of L, W, and H, they're all going to get doubled. So if you knew this formula, it saves you some time. But now we already said that LW is equal to 24t. So we're just going to be able to replace this with 24t. Also, I should notice that the answer choices only have t in it. So when I get to LH, I know what L is. I know that's 8 over 3. And I also know what H is. So that's 15. I haven't dealt with anything other than t right now. It's really when I get to WH that I have a problem. Because over there, I don't really know what W is right now. So if I put W times 15, well, that's not really good because none of the answer choices have W in them. So what I should do is go back to that other equation that we had over here, that LW is equal to 24T, plug in the 8 over 3 for L, so now that's 8 over 3W equals 24T. And now get rid of the 8 over 3 by multiplying by 3 over 8. And what that will do for you is get you what W is in terms of T. Now here I can do 24 divided by 8, that's 3, then 3 times 3, that's 9. So W is equal to 9T. That's what I now want to pop in for my W right here. So now it's 9T times 15 plus 8/3 times 15. For that one, I can actually clean that up as well. 15 divided by 3, that's 5. 5 times 8, that would make that 40. Plus the 24T. And then I'm multiplying all of that by 2. And let's see, that's going to get me 48T plus 80. And then 9 times 15 times 2. So I'm going to do the 15 times 2 first. It's 9 times 30. That creates 270. And I can see that there's only one answer that is going to have 48T plus 270T in it. So I can just focus on that right now. And what does that get me? That gets me, the only possibility is the one that ends in an 8, which is B. All right, guys, if you liked that explanation and you want some more SAT boosting to your score, that's the website to go to. Here they're giving us the graph of g of x. And then they're saying g of x plus 28 has some sort of equation. But I could also come up with the equation for g of x right now, and it's going to look like this. So let's start off by setting up those parentheses. And I can set up x minus whatever my x-intercept is. So for this one, it's x minus 1. For the next one, it would be 3 and -2. And it's always x minus and x minus. So for this last one, it's actually going to turn into x plus 2. But then the last thing that we got to talk about in setting up the equation here is which one should have the squares. And you get squares on the ones that are bouncing. So that's going to happen for the 1 and the 3. And then because this one's just moving to the left by 28, the number in the front here is actually not going to change. The only thing that is going to change when I'm going to the left or to the right is going to be x values. But if I were to draw what g of x plus 28 would look like, well, it would literally be the exact same shape. It would just need to be moved to the left 28 units. So where would it touch the x-axis? Well, instead of it being at 1 and at 3, it's now going to be at whatever you get when you subtract 28 from those two values. And of course, we could do it for the -2 as well, but we don't need to because the only possibilities for what b could be is one of the ones that's underneath the square. So the ones that are going to be underneath the square are going to be corresponding to these. Now, this is -27 and -25. Remember, it's always supposed to be x minus whatever that number is and x minus the other number, which in this case just turns into x plus each of these numbers. But we're really not supposed to change it into that form because if you look at what they did, they left it as x minus. So you don't actually want to change it. You want to leave it the way it is. And of course, you could put the squares here, but they're asking you which one of the following could be the value of b. Now, b is just going to be after the x minus. So it's either going to be your -25 or your -27. Either one would have been acceptable, but the only one listed is -25. favorite website of all time. All right, we just got to take that first part right there, and we need to translate that into an equation. So it says the weight of sample A, I'm just going to use A for that. Then it uses the word is, that's going to be an equal sign. 468% of is going to be a time symbol, or I could do parentheses. And then it says the weight of sample B. So we just put the B in there. Now we're going to do the same thing for the next part here. It says the weight of sample A is 0.78%. So A equals 0.78% of C. Now they're saying if the weight of sample C is P%, the weight of sample B, oh my God, what is up with these people? C equals P% of B. Then what are they asking me for? They're asking for P. Okay, but I have two things that are both equal to A right now. So therefore, I can set those two things equal to each other. So now I got 468% of B equals 0.78% of C. But then I have a percent symbol on both sides. That can cancel out, leaving me with just 468B equals 0.78C. Okay, but ultimately I'm trying to solve for P. All right, but if I want to solve for P, I could start by dividing by B. And I would find out that C over B is equal to P%. But now I need to only get P on its own. They only wanted P. They didn't say they want P%. They just want P. So I need to change this into being P over 100. That's what a percent symbol can always be swapped out for. So that means I now have P over 100 equals C over B, and I should multiply both sides by 100, and that'll cancel out the 100 down there. Now you'll have 100 times C over B. But I now need to use this other thing to figure out what C over B is. One way to do that, it's kind of fun, it's where you divide both sides by B, so that way C over B shows up. And how would I get C over B on its own? I would still need to divide by the 0.78. So that would equal C over B. So whatever this is, I'm going to toss that in over here for C over B. Okay, so let's just put 468 over 0.78 times 100 into Desmos. Comes out to 60,000. That completes practice test 11. If you need more practice, make sure you go to the rest of the videos on my channel. And if you want to boost your SAT score to the moon, make sure you go to boringmathtutor.com.